IT. We're really happy to have you all with us today, and really honored to share with you two outstanding presenters, Rob Klieger of Digital 4NX, an amazingly competent ethical hacking company and digital forensics company, and as well John Scirocco, who is the president of the Scirocco Group, a very large and wonderful property and casualty insurance company based out of New Jersey. Before I turn it over to Rob to begin the presentation, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes, one telling you that upon entrance to this webinar, all of you have been muted. However, if you would like to post questions, you can do so in the chat area, and after the presentation, we're going to leave a section of time to be able to answer those questions and address those questions. So if you have questions during the event, during the seminar, just type them in the chat room and we'll get to them towards the end. Secondly, I just want to say that, oftentimes when we begin our engagement with our clients, we often start with a network assessment where our engineers come in and review and put some tools on our prospects and our customers' network to get a lay of the land, if you will, to understand what the assets on the infrastructure are, and then to be able to begin to evaluate what solutions might be in place to be able to protect the infrastructure, protect the perimeter, and obviously safeguard, our clients' data. For those of our clients, and many of them face pretty stringent compliance and privacy issues that are being passed down through either HIPAA or other compliance. The title insurance area is one that's going through some best practices right now, several of which deal with data privacy. And these compliance issues really create challenges for our customers, many of whom don't have the in-house capability to meet these. For many of our customers that have compliance needs, we actually recommend that they engage with an ethical hacker. And Rob will talk about what that process entails, but really at the end of the day, it's an opportunity to have a hacker working on your behalf to help you understand what the holes in your infrastructure are that might allow somebody who wanted to misuse your data, misuse your corporate data, to stop them from doing so. So with that, we're going to start with Rob Klieger, the president of Digital 4NX. After that, we'll turn it over to John Scirocco, and as the last section, we'll engage in a question and answer for anybody that has any. Rob, you all set?
Yes, I am. Great. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everybody, for attending and taking time out of your day to join us for about an hour. And as Richard said, as far as questions, we definitely encourage them, but for purposes of staying on time, to send your questions in, and we'll address them towards the end. So basically, every day, it seems countless articles, blogs, news reports regarding the latest cybersecurity breach is a key question that never seems to get answered. What exactly are we at risk from, and what are we supposed to do about it? And the days of sort of the casual hackers, I like to call them, where their efforts for little more than just bragging rights have now morphed into some very big business opportunities where financial rewards can be substantial. And it's estimated that the makers of ransomware CryptoLocker have already collected millions upon millions of dollars for that system alone. And when you consider all the viruses in the internet, the amount of revenue that the nefarious coders are collecting, it is really, truly mind-blowing. And the daily news reveal the escalating as well as costly problem of these data breaches for all types of companies, regardless of size, that generally are dealing with the big problem that I see, which is where this information is being stored is generally electronic. What is the information? Fiduciary obligations, regardless of whether they're regulated or not to safeguard these assets, and that when a breach occurs, you're not only dealing with the simple costs of the breach, you're dealing with reputational risk, you're dealing with the regulatory, you're dealing with financial, as well as the legal risks that oftentimes are really going to cause a much greater impact to your business if you can survive something along those lines. So today's agenda, I'm just going to introduce my firm and my services. I'm going to define data security. I'm going to talk a little bit about the confidential information that I just mentioned, the data security issues that are facing firms today, the methods of attack, understanding the basic ESI, and cover a couple additional points. So basically, my firm is a boutique firm based in the New York, New Jersey region, where we provide digital forensic investigation services and various civil and criminal legal matters. We provide those investigations. We provide e-discovery services and consulting, as well as internet response to data breaches and cybersecurity services. And generally, after over decades of experience, we are able to really resolve costly litigation by substantiating the legal matters. As far as the security aspect of the business, we generally will provide proactive services to all types of clients and services that will find that the majority of the times it's not about the technology, it's really a matter of the process or the lack of the process. So we'll often respond to data breaches, which could have been avoided maybe 70% of the time, where either a server was migrated and some IT person may have left the FTP site that was publicly facing a domain, which all of a sudden receives a botnet that causes a data breach. A loss of data after an employment relationship ends. It's generally not responding to the Target or the Sony type of hack where you're dealing with groups or activists that are sort of coming in based on a political cause and looking to take your network down. We're often responding to issues where a breach may have actually been caused due to lack of controls or an uneducated employee, or perhaps a rogue employee that may have purposely misappropriated information without realizing that it is going to be defined as clearly a data breach. So on the screen, without going through it, these are the services that generally we'll look at, and again, from the lens that we see, it's often responding and investigating and dealing with the legal ramifications of a breach, where it is a true investigation versus sort of a network sweep that Rich had spoken about. So what exactly is data security? Well, the reality is if you ask many people, you're going to run into different definitions. The reality, in keeping it sort of simple, is it's keeping information from falling into the wrong person's hands. That information could be the critical personal identification information, name, social security, dates of birth, credit card information, things of that nature. That's the type of information that if it was to fall in the wrong person's hands that we're trying to best protect. As far as the country, as a whole, we're dealing with all different types of notification rules. You have federal statutes and mandates as well as statewide statutes and mandates. And those rules, because it's sort of a new and a growing area, the law is generally catching up with all of these new types of legislation. Obama actually introduced the latter part of last year, a federal mandate requiring businesses of various sizes the responsibility that they have and really ultimately continuing to define data breach. And I forgot exactly the state, but there are certain states that a email address, if that email address was associated to a person's last name and some other type of defined, it is now considered a data breach. So an email is now considered part of data breach. So, why is your firm a target? And this is something that often we're answering that question after the fact that we've responded to a data breach. And the reality is, despite the heightened alertness to data security, a number of firms believe that they're too small or that it won't warrant the interest of a general hacker. And you might want to reconsider that logic, because there was a fraud alert issued in the spring of last year from the FBI that had dealt with the fact that cybersecurity criminals are beginning to aggressively target small and mid-sized businesses. And the head of the FBI Office of the Cyber Division was mentioning that as financial institutions in the world are becoming stronger, a hacker can hit a small and mid-sized business much, much easier, simply because the safeguards and controls are no longer in play. The end-user computers are the weakest link in most firms, and these computers are typically protected only by antivirus software, where most hackers attack at that point rather than working their way through a server or other external-facing protections. So the reality is, many times, if a hacker has penetrated the network from your firm or organization, chances are your network, you're not going to know that a hacker is actually there until they do nefarious things. It could be an email of your sales manager, for example, that has been socially re-engineered to identify an email address to a client or a prospect, which has fabricated that email and deceives them. And then they click on an infected website, which now has caused information to be pushed out of the enterprise without anyone really ever knowing until it's too late. And the reality is, many times we find that the hackers have already been ingested into the archives of networks many, many months prior to the incident after they're responding to a potential data breach allegation. So oftentimes, to debunk the misconception, a hacker isn't there to simply break into your network and then immediately identify and start controlling your network and leaking information out. Very often they're sitting there watching and monitoring the traffic to identify who the key individuals are, so that it allows them to sort of be able to fish for this information that much easier without much effort. The types of information that they are generally after is your confidential information. Just because you don't have a business that maintains credit card numbers doesn't mean that the information you have isn't valuable. And overall, the industry as a whole has been slow to respond to the expanding threat. The implementation of various controls over your staff, your resources, your infrastructure is often still remains very low in the priority for many organizations. And firms who maintain and store a wide array of valuable information, sometimes, I refer to as a data gold, they don't even know that this data gold source even exists. That's the type of information that is critical. And most firms, again, as I mentioned earlier, they fall into sort of two categories: to protect the data and to disclose the data before it's been compromised. That's really the responsibility of the corporate shareholders. And we recommend sort of starting with keeping it simple and breaking your approach into inventory, your information, identify the threats to those assets, and then develop a good defensible security plan to neutralize those threats. I'm going to share with you a little bit later in terms of a little bit more about what that means, but in essence, we really want to inventory the data that we maintain, collect, and store on our network, so that we best can figure out a way how to put safeguards and controls in place to avoid a data breach from happening in the first place. So why is it that some of this information is difficult to secure? Well, generally we have found that sensitive information can be anywhere. Oftentimes, again, it can be papers, it can be on smartphones, it can be in the cloud, it can be in the head of an employee or an executive. This is information that if you don't see it, how do you secure it, how do you protect it, how do you even inventory it? And again, it's really less of a technical issue and more of a process procedural issue to know and be aware of, again, that definition of data security. What is the information that we're best trying to protect from falling into the wrong person's hands? Another commonality that I see in all size businesses really is sort of the myths regards to having information security and having a security plan in place. Some of them, as they're appearing on the screen, perhaps there's some of the attendees that are on this call may have actually said, but generally the commonality is most organizations believe that it's never going to happen to them. They often believe that their employees would never do anything to steal information, and it's often the hackers and the hooligans that are trying to break in. And statistically, from sort of the world that I see, it's more often the insiders taking information out than some type of intruder hacking in to gain access. So internal employees are the biggest threat to businesses today that are often triggering the data breaches in the first place. So as I've mentioned before, depending upon the nature of your business, whether you're regulated, whether you're in financial services, whether you're in healthcare, organizations have a duty to protect that data from those internal and external threats. You need to make sure that if there is this information that you do need for purposes of your business, that you preserve the confidentiality of all that sensitive information by controlling access, use, dissemination, etc. Certain instances, there's law. In other instances, it's a matter of contractual agreements you'll have with third-party vendors and suppliers as to the controls that you have over that sensitive data in the first place. So let's talk about a little of what I've seen, and this is sort of a very quick list of the methods of attack that are most common. So just about every day, the word of hacker attacks, carrying the threat of data and security breaches can not only lead to the embarrassment, but the liability and financial losses of businesses today. And increasingly, clients are demanding to know what protections firms have in place to protect the sensitive information from being lifted or gathered and gained from prying eyes. And the newest threats that have been around have been called hacktivism. And this again is where you have these groups like Anonymous who will find a cause and figure out a way through their global power bring down a website, hack in, and expose the weakness of an organization simply because they can. And those are the most difficult, challenging types of security threats that organizations and governments have today, simply because you cannot actually even see or know when these things are going to occur. Phishing. Again, this comes down to sort of the social media, that if in fact a hacker is on your network and they are looking to socially engineer the activity, in essence, they're able to perform and gain intelligence and have access to information simply because they've communicated to other employees or other individuals that provide this information, which in essence, trigger the fact that now they have the ability to access all type of information. I'll give you an example. We are just concluding on about a $3 billion penetration test. At the end of the test, the conclusion is we did some social engineering after we had full control over their entire network, and we found literally millions upon millions of records of financial records, personal identification information, tax returns, etc., just for the course of their normal operating business. But when we created a website that looked exactly there to the company's website, we created a PR firm that they're working with announcing a deal that has not yet been announced. We created and socially engineered an email after spoofing it, of which 8 out of the 10 executives within a minute and a half of receiving this email clicked on the links, therefore provided us the information that we needed. And ultimately, when we conclude, we're going to sort of explain to them that the circumstance is education. If people are too quick to click on something when they believe that something is true, the other 2 executives read the email and immediately sent a notification to the others not to click on that link because they thought that something was up. And clearly, one of them recognized what was missing. So we dropped the S off of the website domain that they currently have, and they were able to pick up that that was not their correct website domain. Also, it was not a .com, it was a .net. So one executive out of 10, 1 out of 10 people clearly knew and found the fact that this was not a legitimate email. But it was already too late because 8 other executives had already clicked. So my point in all of this is, if you're dealing with a hacker, This is not very sophisticated stuff for people to immediately gain control and access over a network simply by clicking on an infected link. Okay. So without getting into all this, I've talked a little bit about it. We're dealing with the various types of data breaches. As far as, your physical loss, this is very common. Stolen laptop, PDA, smartphone device. Generally, those are controlled by having good systems in place for BYOD, education, and having a policy that if somebody was to lose a device, they can report it, and immediately that device can get wiped clean of its data. As far as the stolen data, I would say that's second on the list, where, again, this is usually where you have a rogue employee that may have misappropriated information to perhaps a personal Dropbox account without realizing that that company no longer has control over that critical data, and therefore it, depending upon what the data is, may have triggered a potential data breach because it's no longer an authorized use of that data, and ultimately that's what the definition legally would be of a data breach. You're dealing with the types of information. You're dealing with the PII. Again, each state has developed a more, micro-level definition that includes, besides the Social Security number, license number, things of the nature of what's on the screen, but also it would include an email that could trigger a data breach, and it is continuously changing. So it's important to really understand sort of the basics of electronically stored information, ESI. When we get the phone call and there's a general understanding that maybe there's a data breach, in some instances the company may call or the lawyer may call and say the client believes that it absolutely is a data breach. I always hate to make an assumption that it is a data breach until we legally define it as a data breach, because that's sort of where John will talk about those trigger points from an insurance standpoint. But in essence, when we get called in, the first and most critical step is to collect the data. We're not only dealing with the data of accessible information, but we're going back in time where hackers generally will look to cover up their tracks, so they'll run a script. And there's some logs, and sometimes those logs aren't fully overwritten. So in essence, when we collect the data, we're collecting it in a way that captures not only the active data, but we're dealing with the inaccessible, the deleted information. We're identifying areas and information that the enterprise may have or managed service provider may be maintaining. And then we're conducting our analysis to figure out and define who, how, and what this caused this data breach. And then lastly, we'll document that. Documentation is key, because I've had many instances where maybe the company's taking the position it's not that big of a deal, nobody got harmed, even though it may have classified as a data breach. They figured that the number was less than 500 individuals, so they didn't do anything to report it. And the next thing they know, there's a knock at the door and HHS is there. So you never really know. The process that we go through is generally acquiring this data, and it's important to understand that when we copy data forensically, it's different than copying it logically or from what an IT's perspective may be, which is they're going to copy the files. In essence, they're going to take the original data and they're going to put it onto some other source, right? They're not capturing the deleted information, the hidden data, and generally in the purposes of copying and pasting that data, they're actually causing the metadata, which is the dates and times and when that thing was created, by whom, etc., which is critical to the investigation. It has now been changed and altered, whereby a forensic image is a fit copy of the original, where we'll take the original bits and bytes of data and we'll take a copy. We'll actually create two copies and put it on a hard drive. And in essence, it's like a DNA fingerprint, which is really the authentication. So this is a critical step, because when we authenticate the electronic properties contained on a hard drive or on a server, we in essence can represent that we have captured what would be deemed as the original. So an analogy would be on these crime shows like CSI, the law enforcement doesn't show up to a blood murder scene, remove the door off the hinges and bring it back to the lab. They lift fingerprints. They take DNA and fibers and samples of hair and glass, and they bring that back to the lab to do their investigation and analysis. Same thing happens when it comes to a digital investigation. So the analysis allows us to, once we have sort of the lockdown version of that time capsule, we can go back in time to look for the deleted data. We can look to recover event logs. We can look to do keyword searches. We can examine the various databases. We really can identify and figure out what exactly happened, what type of information, and is it under the legal definition of a data breach. And again, regardless of size of the organization, it's not about the size of the organization. It's the data that they maintain, they control, that they're obligated, that if somebody had gained access to it, that's in essence the triggering response that a data breach would be responding to. As far as the types of things that we often do from an investigative perspective when a data breach occurs, we generally provide an immediate response that is carefully crafted in a way that we can respond, that is defensible, and again, it's from a legal standpoint that we take the position that we're doing an investigation to analyze truly whether a data breach has occurred, and then we'll quickly determine whether or not the extent of this incident is in fact a true data breach under the legal definition. It crosses across various industries. Data breaches and the root causes are plentiful. Again, it could be a lost laptop, a missing backup tape, a stolen computer, compromised servers. It could be the hacker. It could be the employees, all of which could trigger this data breach response. And it's imperative to immediately investigate the nature and the extent of that intrusion or that data breach. And I say that not for purposes of selling, but for purposes that the government has hired troops of people, 30,000 plus people, that are now going to be coming into all size organizations to do an audit. And in essence, when they show up and there's a knock at the door, you better be prepared to answer all of the questions that they're going to ask. And again, this is something that is happening more and more. And again, we're often involved trying to respond effectively so that companies that have a triggering event will be able to survive long term. So this is a screen that is basically going to talk about where is your information. It could be a very large international company, or it could be a small business that does business across the globe through various distribution hubs. And the information that you conduct with the course of your business is where the source of this critical data is. This may be what Richard was alluding to earlier, where you're going in and you need somebody to map out where is this data, where is it being stored, who has access to it, things of that nature. If you don't do this plan first, then in essence, when we're going in and responding, one of the first things that we're responding to is where is the data stored in the first place. And if we don't have a data map like this, it just makes the costs increase, it makes the time get utilized that much greater, simply to find the source of where this data would be anyway. So it's very critical, in any and all businesses to identify where is this data first and foremost. Here's just sort of a diagram that would show. You naturally would think it's on your laptops, your desktops, it's your voice over IP system, it's your digital copy machine. What about your cloud? What about your GPS devices? What about the Dropbox accounts? The information that you just don't know where this information is, because employees may not be using company-issued Dropbox accounts. Therefore, this is information that is out of the company's control. So you need to really go and think long and hard about the various sources of where this information may be contained, which isn't simply just going to be on the company-issued devices. So sort of in closing with my portion of the presentation, I want to provide you with some tips and best practices about data security. So the first is developing a security plan. You want to have one that is simple. You want to have one that is going to handle short-term issues as well as some of the long-term, and most importantly, the ongoing. Ongoing would definitely be considered something along the lines of education to your employees, to your vendors, to anybody that you're doing business, not once a year, but maybe several times a year, maybe twice a year, through a newsletter, through a lunch and learn type of a training. You need to define from a security perspective. How much security is enough? How good is enough? And when is good enough? Meaning, if companies have the budget to spend as much money as they possibly can into security, is that enough? Are they doing all the right things? Or, you need to, within your organization, figure out how good is good enough. I always found something that was interesting, that with these regulated businesses thinking that they're compliant, and they think that because they're compliant, that means that they're forced to have good security. And to some extent, that's true. But just because you are compliant, or just because you are an entity that is regulated through compliance, it doesn't mean that you have good security, right? It's a totally different situation. So again, think about it. Take a look at your business. Identify, what is the information that you have that's sitting on your systems. Identifying who has access to all of that type of information. Be aware. Know that there are alternative technologies that you can secure those endpoints. Review these plans not once a year, but review them frequently. Why? Because technology changes frequently. The business environment changes frequently, and your client demands will change frequently as well. So it's very important that you don't just write this policy, put it on a shelf, and then hope that you never have to use it. It's a living document that's going to continue to change, and you want to be able to be in a position that you're always one step ahead of it prior to ever having to use it. It doesn't have to be costly, right? It doesn't have to be expensive in order for it to work. So there are various free tools that would at least allow for people that have this critical information, that if a policy was something along the lines of, that there's credit card information that an individual may have, which also may exist on their cell phone. By using encryption or forcing encryption at the server level, that is the 80% the risk that would avoid a data breach if there was in fact an attacker that attacked your network and misappropriated this information. That if that data, they couldn't do anything with it simply because it was encrypted, then it legally wouldn't be defined as a data breach at that point, because you have those levels to prove that somebody wasn't able to crack through that encryption or that password and easily use this critical data. Right? So there are things that can be done, relatively speaking, free and cheap or inexpensive. That is, negligence by not having that in place. You need to understand that this is something that is routinely changing legally at the state level as well as the federal level. So if you happen to be doing business in various states, it doesn't matter that your headquarters is based in New Jersey. It matters is based on the information that you control and the states of which the end user whose data may have been breached, where they live, where they reside, because the reporting obligations differ in those various states. Again, you need to understand what is the information and the assets that you're trying to protect in the first place. Who has access to the data? And if people don't need to have access to that critical data, you want to avoid from people having access to everything on the company's network. It just causes more concern for people to have access to data that they otherwise shouldn't have, which allows them to, in essence, capture data without necessarily meaning to, or if they were, meaning to misappropriate information, you're giving them the keys to your kingdom to do so. Have destruction policies in place. Everybody's been talking years and years about document retention. It's not about retention. The less data that you have that you don't need to maintain for business purposes, you're better off destroying. Why? Because even though storage prices are cheap, in the event that you have a data breach, the more data that you're in possession of, the more the costs are. So again, I would say and argue all the time, it's not about having defensible retention policies, it's about having defensible destruction policies. So if the data is no longer available to be maintained and stored, then you have a less likelihood of having a breach, A, in the first place, and B, you can sleep better at night knowing that nobody is going to be able to use that in the course of any type of investigation down the road, which is just going to increase the case costs as well as potential negligence that have existed in the first place. This is important. You want to have your team in place. I get phone calls all the time where there was no team in place, and we're reacting. And incident response is great for my business because it's one of those things that is unpredictable, and sometimes companies have no choice other than to immediately start cutting checks to their forensic experts, to the lawyers, to anybody and everybody that needs to help respond to this data breach. A lot of it can be avoided by having all of that done up front. And it's not only having your team in place, it's making sure that these are experienced professionals, that they know how to deal with the incidents, with the data breach. You need to know about your policy, know about your waivers. You need to know what is covered, what is covered. You need to know. And quite frankly, if you understand all of these sort of tips, the best practices, and I think sort of common sense approach by knowing your business, knowing the information that you have that's critical, in essence, if you understand your risk, and lower your, you can increase your terms to have better, more robust coverage because you've been able to better manage and handle your risks because you're aware of what your risks really are. So in simple terms, take inventory. Know the information in your business that you maintain, that if in fact it was to fall in the wrong person's hands, you know how to deal with it. You know how to get rid of and destroy information in a defensible way so that you don't need to maintain information that you don't need to maintain for legitimate business purposes. If there's information that you do need to maintain, you want to make sure you have proper security protocols in place to secure it. If it's not something that you need for maintaining in business records, then you pitch it and you get rid of it. And again, you often are going to plan ahead to avoid these things as best as you possibly can in the first place. And at that point, I'll leave you with this sort of closing cartoon. And I will turn over the control to John Scirocco from the Scirocco Group.
Firsthand, and we're firsthand as an insurance agency, we've had issues in our own firm where you get some kind of a virus or a systematic issue that shuts you down or requires some major cleanup of data and or any threats that are viruses or things of that nature. My objective right now is just to keep a very simple scenario, as if I'm talking to a client, you being the client, and saying, here are some ways to protect the things Rob is talking about on a day-to-day level that could affect you. And by buying insurance, like buying homeowners insurance or business insurance, you're transferring that risk to an insurance company to say, hey, should my system go down, because I depend on my system 24/7 to keep my business up and running. If my system is down because of a breach, virus, an infection, or a hacking, whatever the case may be, how do I protect my business operation and sustain itself and keep it running? So not unlike a fire in a building where you go down and as a result your business ceases to run, you then have certain components of coverage. And one of the more critical components, if there is a cyber attack and it shuts your business operation, besides getting the fire restored or what was damaged prior to the fire, you're also going to have interruption as a result of that loss. So you'd have business interruption coverage. So in a sense, analogous to your current insurance programs that you may have for a small business or any professional services, whether it's a law firm, the same concept dovetails into the cyber world. So I'm going to just kind of post for you a little bit of an overview of how, if we were looking at a program with $1 million in coverage, and we're going to get into some quick details here. Note, and this slide talks about how the coverage will be applicable on a $1 million limit for damages. Go to the second component. For all damages, claim expenses, privacy event expenses, extortion expenses, privacy regulatory investigation. These are things that all come under having the right cyber program in place for insurance. So the next slide just kind of gives you a little bit of some of the coverage components. What are we looking to cover? Well, on the first go-in, one of the components that you'd want in a robust insurance program would be media liability. All right. So if you're out there publishing, working, posting information on your website, and you're sued from an outsider as a result of a slanderous statement or something that is posted on your site that someone can sue you for, and you don't have the proper coverage, you're exposed even in your ability to post this information. All right. The next component, I'll just kind of drop through these, then we're going to walk through what I would say is a simple insurance quotation and say, if I was buying the coverage, why should I have it, and how does it apply, and what potential costs could there be? And I'll give you a little overview on that in a minute. Next one is network security. All right, if you're dealing with something where there's unauthorized access, failure to prevent false communications, things of that nature, all these things that attacks against a website and computer system, if you don't have those things up and running, you're liable. And again, that data that gets breached, you can have a suit against you from a number of sources. So again, we're looking to have an overlay of coverage for something on that level. Next issue is privacy injury liability. Unauthorized release. This is a big one. Everyone hears a lot about this. Unauthorized release of personal identifiable information, health information, HIPAA requirements, privacy breaches that result in violations of a person's right to privacy. That's for a lot of professional services firms, medical organizations, law firms, accounting firms, even insurance firms like us, where we hold on to client data. Okay, that data could be Social Security information, health records. So that's a very complex issue, but that's an area that the cyber coverage will help defend and protect. All right. Then you've got the regulatory issues, where now you're being fined and penalized as a result. You have to defend those related issues. So if the local authority comes in, as Rob was talking about, somebody knocks on your door and they come in, and you've got to go through a whole regulatory process, the cost to defend yourself, and that whole process is part of a robust cyber program. Then obviously the last component on this page is talking about regulatory fines. So if the New Jersey, the Department of New Jersey comes in and says, we have to fine you, $18,000 a week because the way your medical practice is set up, everything with regard to client information is exposed and could be subject to regulatory fines and penalties. So as Rob was saying before, you've got to be armed with the right defense, and the only thing we can do here is defend you on a insurance perspective basis is to have that coverage built into a good cyber program. Okay. Now, this term, Net Protect 360, happens to be an insurance company. It has to be CNA's term. 360 means complete coverage surrounding you as the business owner. All right. And what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about this in terms of an insurance company, whether it's Chubb, CNA, Travelers, Hartford, all the big names, Zurich. They provide something in a very similar vein, but I'm using CNA as an example because I recently did a quote for a professional services organization, and I'll share that with you in a second. But again, going back to what does it cover? All right, costs related to voluntary privacy breach. We talked about that. Notification costs, rights and violations, private action if the insured, meaning us as the business, fails to comply with any privacy law worldwide, or their own privacy policy. So if something is broken, breached, or gone through, this is how this policy would respond. And again, it completely wraps around what you as a business owner have a need to have covered for. All right. So there's a couple of things here. Again, going back to 360, and again, it could be anybody's form. But if you look at some of the things here, it's covering enterprise network information. All right, not just websites, security breaches, mistakes and unauthorized employee acts. All right, including virus attacks, hacking, identity theft. So these are certain components that are built in. Theft of third-party trade secrets. So you have data on a client or information that's confidential that gets out of your control because the hackers obtain it. You're sued for that. Theft of money, goods and securities via one's insured network. Privacy breaches by cloud providers. Even if you're going through the cloud, and as a result of the breach, that data resides in the cloud, and it's stolen. And as a result, there's compromises to your customer base, or as a result of people you have to maintain appropriate and proper records for. Coverage is there. Privacy for vicarious liability, wrongful acts, etc. Others' inability to use access to the insurance network or rely on data residing there. So if you're hosting a network for somebody, and I go through your portal to get my data or to run my business, and you're now down, all right, the exposure exists. infection of a third party due to security breach of the insurance network, defamation, false statements, infringement. Those are things we kind of touched on a little bit, but this, again, just wraps around what you as a business owner will have certain coverages for and the need for these coverages. Okay? Interesting, I was just on the West Coast, and I'm at in Vancouver, and on Saturday I see a bulletin, and it may have happened here on the East Coast. Starbucks had their point of service operation, their cash register system, breached. I'm sure maybe some of you heard about it. And as a result of that breach, I think they were down for about 4 to 6 hours. And literally, they had to give away all the coffee and or drinks because people were coming in. They couldn't sell the product. And as a result, they lost an enormous amount of dollars during that little breach, that process. That's a classic example of what we would say is not only they have to rectify the breach itself, get the experts in there to fix it. There's a huge expense to doing that, bringing in the folks like the SWKs and the folks like Rob to come in and say, how do I rectify this damage to my liability for us to even transact and commerce today because we're shut down. And the second component to that is the lost business that results as a result of that breach. Okay. This is to kind of keep it simple, what I wanted to do was show you or post here a very simple insurance quotation. And it outlines specifically $1 million in coverage for all the components I touched on. The media liability component, network security, these are all standalone limits, but the maximum in this particular case, this is a simple case, the maximum insurance that would be applied to this program for any one loss would be a maximum of $1 million for these components. The network security, privacy, injury liability, where you're now sued as a result of the fact that that information got out and customers are suing you. Regulatory proceedings, the cost to defend yourself during that process, the regulatory fines that could be imposed. All right, then you've got reimbursement expense. A very important one is the event expense itself. So if I have a major breach in my system, my computers, and as a result I've got to call in the experts to come in here and fix these things, we've got to bring in that team. That team could be very expensive for that 3-4 week period or whatever the time frame may be. That would pay for that. That's going to reimburse you for that event expense to get your system back and running and repaired and properly functioning again. This is an interesting one, extortion demand. You've heard of this, you may have heard this term, crypto virus. And if you ever watched the TV series, The Good Wife, this has been an interesting thing where in one chapter of the series, they had an extortion demand to say, we're shutting you down, you won't have access to your email unless we have the key to unlock that, and you're basically, you have access to your systems, and as a result, if you don't pay us $100,000, we won't turn the system back on and allow you to get back into your business profession. That is a very interesting one, and that extortion demand is covered, again, by the 360 type program. Okay? Last one, and I really want to talk on, is the business interruption piece, because as a result of not only the extortion demand, the fact that your data is compromised and destroyed, and you're down potentially for an extended period of time, in certain cases a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, who knows, you're going to lose business. And as a result, the net operating profits from your firm and our operation could be compromised, and as a result, we've got to figure out a way to protect that. And that coverage component is the business interruption piece, which fills in the gaps and does a very, very good and robust job in getting you back on your feet so that you're not shut down ad infinitum. It could be as simple as a bakery operation, a service provider, retail operation, where that coverage is very, very critical. Okay? So I'm just giving you a little overview of some of the things here that the insurance component does for you as a business owner and why it's important. I go back to the old analogy of, hey, we buy insurance to insure our building for fire. Oh, absolutely, no question about it. But if I told you that you're 90% more likely to have a data breach and the potential of a hacking attack that causes a business interruption than you are fire in your building, you would say, geez, we got to get some insurance for that. We got to protect us from that. So as a result of that component, that's a real statistic. It's over 90% more likely of a chance that a data breach could shut you down than a fire would. So we've got to protect, we've got to look at this, and it's a whole new world. And just looking at what you're hearing, and a classic example goes back to that Starbucks issue that just happened over the weekend. It brought it very close to home from folks I'm talking to. I happened to be at an insurance conference, and a discussion was raised about the viability of the business interruption component for this type of insurance for cyber liability. So with that, I want to just close on, okay, just our contact information here. And at any point in time, you can email us, myself and my associate Scott Gillender, with any questions. And what we can do is share with you a basic application so folks can understand down the road, what does it take to at least initiate a quotation? How much would it cost? Kevin, just go back. I want to just point out on that quote, I want to just share something with the audience. The total premium for this particular program for this financial services firm, which is one we're just bound up for them, is approximately $10,000 a year for all these coverage components. All right. This is a firm that's about $25 million in sales, gross revenue, and they're more on their platform is geared towards the accounting industry. So you can see what we put together for this client, and their response is saying, "I need it." Makes a lot of sense, and you can. These are coverage components that don't have to be in all policies. But we recommend a 360 concept where you're wrapping around all the components where you could be exposed and your business can have the understanding that we can get insurance and this is how it can apply. All right? So I'll turn that back over to you guys. If I'm not sure if Richard, if you want to just back up here, we can start a Q&A. Hello?
Hi, this is Richard. Thank you.
Hey, Richard.
Hey, guys, really wonderful. I mean, sitting here, I'm just jotting down notes, learned a ton from both of you, so I really want to thank you for it. Anybody, Brian, anybody have any questions out there in the audience? Brian, are you there?
Now I am there. I unmuted.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, as I was saying before, if you have questions, please type them into the question section or the chat section of the GoToMeeting control panel. In the meantime, the question that we have now is, will the presentation be available for download after the webinar? The answer to that, I can take that one, is yes. It will be up on the netup-it.com site tomorrow. Again, that's netup, all one word, -it.com. And that is the only question currently. So maybe you want to wait a minute and see if anyone else types anything else in. First question is, what should we do if we get that cyber ransom attack?
Well, let me answer from the insurance guy side, then I'll turn it over to Rob. I think the simple answer is hopefully you have insurance, number one, and if you did, that would be something you'd call your broker up and say, hey, I need to notify and file a potential claim here, assuming you've got the coverage. Then the next thing, I think first thing you do is give somebody like Brian or Richard or Rob a call to say, I need help. What do I do?
Rob, you want to touch on it? Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I've actually dealt with these things before. I mean, sometimes the first thing that we might recommend is pull the plug on the computer, first and foremost. Sometimes before that, we would take a sample of a couple of the files. Usually within those files, there's an embedded code. And within that embedded code, we can determine the flavor of CryptoLocker. Some versions, we are able to tap into a database that allows us to identify whether, we can break through the encryption. Others, not. But generally, I would say it's amazing to me today, in this day and age, how companies still will not implement a backup solution, because those instances where CryptoLocker has occurred, the devastation, was dramatic simply because they didn't have a backup system in place. So I would say button it up, SWK, if they, I'm sure, have offered backup solutions and you opted not to have one, that is the one thing that will save you from going through, much pain when you get, when you fall victim to CryptoLocker. That's all I have to say on
I think we may also have Matt Hahn with us on the presentation. Matt is our Vice President of Network Services. Matt, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for a great presentation. I appreciate the opportunity to share some knowledge, and hopefully everybody picks up something from this. So, as a managed services provider, many of our clients, one way or another, have been exposed to variants of the crypto locker, crypto wall, and much like with what Mr. Klieger said, is that when you have a good business continuity solution in place, in many cases, if the backup is happening several times throughout the day, like for example in our case, we could do a backup every 5 minutes of the data. When you get hit with such a threat, you have the ability not only to revert back to an earlier state in time, but to a much closer state in time that you were working in your production environment, as opposed to maybe going to a backup the night before you were infected or got hit with this ransomware. So having an adequate business continuity solution that's providing several backups throughout the day is also a fantastic way to mitigate the extended downtime that could occur as a result of these.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Yep, this is Brian again. Another question that has come through. For the insurance, what does the $25,000 retention mean?
That's basically, I'll answer that. That's basically your deductible. So in the event that the first $25,000 of any regulatory expense or liability claim or first-party claim, damage to repair of your system, because you had to bring the team in for an exhaustive 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that's a standard deductible. However, that's higher because this particular firm wanted a higher deductible to self-insure. So they could fund that first $25,000, but they needed the protection above and beyond. Typically, those deductibles could be as low as $5,000. Okay, and that's not unusual. 5 to 10 is pretty much the norm. This one happened to be 25.
Brian, any other questions?
Yep, just checking here again, and that looks like the end of the questions.
All right, great. Well, I want to really thank Rob and John so much. Just an incredibly informative session, and I appreciate everyone's participation. I hope you all have a great day, and please do visit the NetUp-IT website if you want to see a copy of this presentation tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.